Good morning and welcome to Autofill My Return. My name is Cameron Peters. I'm the CEO and founder of TaxCycle, and I'm happy to be here with you today to talk about Autofill My Return. Now, our agenda for today, we're going to talk about getting authorization to download AFR data, which is basically the represented taxpayer authorization. We're going to show you how to request your AFR download. We'll show you how to match and import the data that you get. I will show you how to aggregate multiple slips into a single entry. We'll also show you that you can do AFR multiple times, so you can make a final check before you file the return to make sure that additional slips have not shown up. We'll show you a couple of summaries, and finally we'll show you how you can export some of your AFR values to Excel if you want to do something with the T3 or with 500 T5008 slips there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to carry forward some returns that I prepared last year, and we'll use them as the base case, and that will show us a little bit how we can match AFR data to data that you might have from the prior year's return. So I'm going to select carry forward here, and I have my returns in my AFR webinar file. If I click on that, I can carry forward this 2023 return for Thomas and Abigail Sims, who have been our AFR clients that we've used in these demos since the beginning of time. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is look at the AuthRep schedule, and that's the schedule that we use to request authorization to represent this client. So what I'm going to do is press F4 to open up FastFind, and I'm going to type AuthRep, which is the way I can authorize or cancel a representative. We used to call this the T1013, but CRA made a couple of changes like 4 or 5 years ago. So the first thing that I need to do here is select the type of to prepare, which we want to do online access by an individual. So I'll select that. You can see all my representative information is carried forward along with the taxpayer information for Thomas. And then I need to select a level of authorization, and I also need to deal with the signature. Now, what you'll typically want to do if you're doing a lot of these returns, you can see if I move my mouse cursor over top of the yellow review message, I get a little pop-up that says select default authorization level for new files. So if I open that up, it will take me to my options. And if I scroll down to where I'm showing the AuthRep default values, you can see that I can, oh, sorry, I made that scroll again. You can see that I can set some defaults here so that I don't have to go in and make those changes every time. So for instance, if I'm going to select online access by an individual for every new client, I can select this here. I can select to insert the current date on transmission or printing, and I can select the authorization level that I want each time. So that's something that you can set up in options, and then once you do that, you don't have to do it on the AuthRep form. But I'm just going to leave it as it is for now, because the next time I do this demo, I want to be reminded to show that you can set up those defaults. So once I have completed this form, I can switch over to my transmit menu, and the transmit menu will tell me that I need to print the AuthRep form, and I also need to get it signed before I can file this. So if I click on print the AuthRep on PDF, you can see I get a dialog where I can select up my print options. If I'm using DocuSign or tax folder, I can set that up here as well, which I'm not going to go through today, but that's an option in terms of a way to get your signature. And I can generate the PDF. And it's going to show it to me here. So here's the PDF that we've got, and we need our taxpayer to sign. If we use one of the signature services, then of course TaxCycle will automatically show when the taxpayer has actually signed the form. But since we're using the manual process, I need to confirm that we've got a paper signature, which I can do that by clicking this link. I should also highlight that if you've used an electronic signature, you can click the e-signature link there, and TaxCycle will prompt you to enter the time at which the document was electronically signed, which is a requirement of CRA. But for paper signature, they don't care. Then I need to agree the terms and conditions. I can read them by clicking this link if I like, or I can click the box, and then TaxCycle will tell me to transmit now. Now, because I'm doing just a random test file, and CRA doesn't know anything about Thomas Sims, this authorization is going to fail, and I'm going to get an error message back. But that's okay. I'll show you how you can resubmit, and we won't get a successful transmission today, but there's nothing more to do if it works. So if I click transmit now, you can see TaxCycle's transmitting and authorizing. It's prompting me to save the file because, of course, we want to keep the status of the return information in the file complete with it. We don't want to lose that. Oh, and it worked this morning. I did this morning at like 5 o'clock or something like that, and it failed, so I expected it to fail. Anyways, if you do get a failed transmission, you can dismiss and start again. So if you click that, then you can go through the whole process again. But fortunately, this worked out for me. And then you'll notice that at the top of the screen, I have a new prompt that says autofill my return data may be available. Now, we're not getting any clues from CRA. They haven't given us a notification that there's autofill my return data. What TaxCycle does is if it sees that you have online access available and AFR is also available, you just get a reminder that you can go get that AFR data. And of course, as all of you experienced tax preparers know, when you're requesting AFR data early in the season, like February 20th, before all of the T3s, T4s, T5s have been filed, you will likely not get all of the information that's available. And that's why it's important to remember that you can use autofill my return multiple times. So let's click on the link here, and we'll bring up the AFR dialog box, which I've made nice and big here. It shows us all of the clients that are available in our file, and it shows us that our auth rep was filed today by me, and for the other clients in this file, it's already been filed. We don't have any additional data on that. Then I click next, and when I do that, TaxCycle is going to open up a browser, I hope. And for the certification test, the user ID is user ID and password. But for when you're using this in real life, you'll use the same user ID and password that you do for Represent a Client. This is just the test site that we're using today. So I'm going to click Log In. We need to confirm the social insurance numbers that we're using to download data, and then I can click Next. And the system will process my request. It might take a second or two, and then it tells us that TaxCycle is successfully connected to the CRA, and it's downloading the requested tax data. So I can close that, and I can switch back to TaxCycle and autofill my return. And now when I've done that, you can see I've got a list of all of the data that's been downloaded, and I can scroll down here and see what we've got for all of our taxpayers. So for Thomas and Abigail, we've got quite a bit of information. And then for Jason, we have nothing. And Josie, we have a couple of things. So this just says CRA doesn't have any data on Jason. So we probably want to try again later. So that's that. So as you can see, we have a list of all of the information that's been downloaded. Any information that's new and hasn't been imported into the return yet has a little starburst that appears over on the left-hand side. Then we have the type of slip and the name of the issuer. And if we move our mouse cursor over top, we can see a summary of all that data. Of course, that's the same data that appears over on the right-hand side, sorry. And in this case, TaxCycle is saying we need to import this into a new T4 slip. And because it's a new T4, you'll see that there's no existing data over on for 2024 or 2023. So if we switch over to Oliver's Electricity, you can see that we have some information over on the left-hand side. So the import column is all of the information that we've just downloaded from CRA. The 2024 column is any data that we've already entered on the slip, if any. So if you have a paper slip and you're entering the data and using CRA's AFR to verify that that information is correct, you can do that here. And you'll notice that some of the fields here show in bold. So those bold fields are ones where the information that's imported and the information that we have in the tax return don't match. Now, if we want to preview some of this information, we can double click on these fields and TaxCycle will take us directly to the form. So if I double click here, you can see that TaxCycle will open up the T4 and it will show us where that value is going to go. Now, if we wanted, and this isn't going to work very well on this monitor because it'll make it very small, but we can actually show the autofill my return information and the tax return side by side. And then we can, click on here and navigate to different slips and see all of it at the same time. So that's available to those of you that have multiple monitors or big monitors where you are able to show lots of information. But for today, I'm just going to go back to a full screen of TaxCycle and a regular screen of autofill my return data. Okay. You can also see that on the left-hand side in the second column, we have a drop-down here so that we can actually drop or select what T4 we want this map to. So if for some reason you had a slip for the T4, oh, we don't want to import them both there. If we went back to our T4 here, and we had one for Jones, and maybe I'll just misspell it. So if I had Jones Excavating or something, and it's actually the same company, then you could manually match this data up to John's Excavating. Now, the reason it wouldn't have matched automatically is TaxCycle uses the description or the issuer to actually match all that data. And of course, when we import this, it will update that to match whatever CRA has on file. Okay, so let's import this data and take a look at what happens. So when we import the data, you'll notice that in all of our slips, we now have an additional column. So the column here shows exactly what has been downloaded from CRA, and the amount column shows the data that you've entered. Okay. And it's also highlighting some of the other issues that have come up with respect to an RL1, which I'm not going to get into today. But you can see that through all of these slips, it's automatically copied these values over. Now, if you have already entered data here, TaxCycle will not override it unless you select to override the data. So it'll keep what you've actually entered. Then you can review all the differences and decide what you actually want to claim. Because the data that you get from CRA might not always be correct. You know, you might know that the issuer of the T4 slip has amended the T4. CRA hasn't got that information yet, so you want to file the correct information because eventually CRA will get that correction, and then the return would be wrong. If we look at the T4A, we can see that TaxCycle's also copied data in here, and the same with the T5. Now, if we look over in the Prepare index, using the form selection dropdown, I can say, show me all of the forms where I have AFR data, and then TaxCycle will give me a list of everything. And I can see all of the data that TaxCycle has provided. Now, it's interesting here, CRA has given us this test case where the information is actually not correct. So this is what we downloaded from CRA. Box 52 and box 53 are a total of 1,875, but the capital gains are only 800. So TaxCycle has highlighted this error, which is obviously an error in the AFR data. And I guess to blame CRA would be wrong, because it's whoever filed this slip could make this mistake, I guess. But in this case, this is a CRA test file, so I guess CRA did make the mistake. But anyways, doesn't matter. So TaxCycle will highlight those differences and anything that's kind of inconsistent so you can review it. The other thing is if you have data that you've entered that isn't included in AFR, for instance, so if I put $4,000 here, you'll see this also highlights as a, you know, the T3 slip doesn't match the values provided by AFR. Do we want to use the AFR values? And if I click use AFR values, it will update that. If I click the check mark, it will just hide that error. So we can go through and see all of the data that we've got from CRA, including on the summaries, the RSP deduction limit, et cetera, et cetera. All right. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about is aggregating slips. And you'll know that if you've done tax returns in the past, that sometimes you'll get a single T3 on paper, but it will come through as several separate filings when you use AFR. And that's just because that's what large financial institutions are allowed to do. They can file the tax information for each of the funds separately, and they'll show up in AFR as separate T3 slips. And then to save paper, they can aggregate all of that information onto a single T3 slip and mail that to the client. Now, if you like to actually do a reconciliation and make sure that your paper slip and what you're downloading from CRA actually matches, you will need to aggregate some of those slips, and I wanted to show you how to do that. If we go to autofill my return again, TaxCycle will open up the matching page. And what we can do here is look at the T3 slips and say I got one T3 slip, but two T3 T3s in AFR. I can select that slip twice so that Jane's Estate and Trust appear twice here. And then you'll notice on the right-hand side, we get the slips aggregated. So all of those T3 slips together show in these totals. So now I can look at this and see if it matches my paper slip. The field here is what the title of the slip is going to be, and then here are the slips that have been included that we've got, or where we're mapping it. Now, when I click Import Data, we'll now see that our T3 slip for Jane's estate and trust is here, and all of that aggregated information appears. Because we already had data, we need to update this to match the values in AFR. And of course, we've got a lot of yellow up here because of the weird data that CRA is giving us. Okay, let's look back at all the forms here, and we will see that the property, the property cooperative slip that we've got here still exists. And if we look in our review messages, TaxCycle is going to give us a message to delete that if I can find it. So if I look here, it says we've got a slip here that doesn't have autofill my return values. That's because we recreated it last time. If I need to, I can just click on the T3 here, and I can delete this T3 slip with no AFR data, which I'll do right now. And then we'll have the single slip that we were talking about. The other thing, when we aggregate slips onto a single T3, we get a special memo, and that memo shows us the list of all of the funds or trusts that have reported on this memo. And it's important to keep that memo there, especially if it's correct, because TaxCycle will use that next year for matching the T3 slips to this particular paper slip. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is just refreshing your client data before filing. So I mentioned before we can do AFR multiple times. TaxCycle will assist us by showing us where there's new AFR data that doesn't match the existing data, including if slips have been amended. So in order to do that, I'm going to select Autofill My Return again. And then down at the bottom, you'll see that there's a box here that says Download Again. And I'm going to click Download Again. And this will take us back to the very first page. Now, just so you know, CRA updates the information on AFR overnight. So if we've downloaded information for Thomas Sims today, or 14 minutes ago, as it's highlighted in this green bar, if I go back to CRA and download the data again, I'm going to get the exact same thing. So it doesn't pay, like if you're anxiously waiting for some slips to come, hammering on the download again button 5 or 10 times a day is not going to make the data show up any sooner. So we kind of help you out here by, in the green bar, we say use the data downloaded by Cameron 14 minutes ago. If it's less than 24 hours ago, we leave that box checked because there's no point in downloading it again. But I'm going to break the rule and I'm going to uncheck the box, and I'm also going to uncheck Josie, Jason, Abigail, and I'm just going to get some information from Thomas. And of course, as I said, CRA won't have changed any of the data. So I've simulated some updated data, which I'm using through a special facility, downloading an XML file. So this is an XML file that I've made that has all the CRA data plus some additional T3 slips in it. So when I click on this button and click open, TaxCycle will pretend to download it from CRA, and you'll notice that I have a whole bunch of additional information here. So we've got Bob's estate and trust, Sam's estate and trust, Val's estate and trust, property cooperative. All this information is a little bit different from what we've got built into the return. So you'll also note that everything else is dimmed out, and it's exactly the same as before. So none of the T4s, the T4Es, none of that has changed. So now we can just decide what we want to do with these T3s, and if we want, we can aggregate them all onto one single slip. So we can say it's all part of Jane's estate and trust, Jane's estate and trust, like that. And we can see the imported data, the imported data that's going to change a little bit. When I click import data, all that information is going to be updated on this slip. And let me see. we can see again our imported data is here, Jane's Estate and Trust. Okay. Now, let us go back and look at some T5008. So I'm going to go through the same process again. And what I'm going to do is go back to autofill my return. I'm going to select, oh, did I click import data? Okay, I'm going to select download again. And I'm going to go download again. And I'm going to do the same thing for Tim. I'm going to select the XML file to import. And this time I'm going to download T3 and T5008. And I'm going to click open. And now you can see we've got a whole bunch of T5008 slips that are showing here. And there's a lot of them. You can get up to 500. And there's a couple of new options. So you can aggregate the slips by issuer and stock, or you can aggregate them just by issuer and currency. And down here at the bottom, you can see I've got aggregate 32 T5018 slips into 3 groups. And TaxCycle is showing us the 3 groups that it's going to use. It's going to use RBC investments in Canadian dollars, RBC investments in US dollars, and BMO investments in Canadian dollars. So when I choose this, it will give us that option. Or if you want to do it the other way, you can go through and manually decide how you want to group those T5008s. So for instance, I can aggregate the RBC ones. I can aggregate Brookfield Management into its own. So that one would go here. I can go through and select any of those the way that I want. But what I'm going to do today is aggregate them into 3 groups. There's an option that controls this now. I can import this data. And when I do that, you'll see that I have a T5008 slip. And again, it's aggregated, so it shows all of the memos for all of the different securities that were traded. The data that we have has no cost or book value, so you know that this sometimes happens when you're getting data from CRA. Sometimes the book value's there, sometimes it's not. So if it's not there, you need to provide it. So the same thing here. This is RBC investments in US dollars. Here are the stocks that are showing there. And then finally, BMO investments. This is an aggregated security. There's a couple here in Canadian dollars. And of course, when the currency is Canadian dollars, the currency field is left blank. Okay. The other thing that we'll see here is we have a T5008 slip summary. This will show you the list of all of the different slips. So this can be a quicker way of reviewing the cost and expenses associated with each of the stocks. Now, if you don't want these aggregated the way I've done by issuer, under options, and this option is off by default, under T1, autofill my return, you can see there's a selection here to group the T5008 slips by issuer and currency by default. If I turn that off, then TaxCycle will not do that, and you can get a larger list in the T5008 slip summary. So that's an option. You can handle it that way if you like. There's also a reconciliation form for the T3s. So the T3s shows all of the T3s issue all of the T3 funds available, whether they've been aggregated or not, and then it shows us the total of each of those columns and what's been reported. So then you can go through and look at your aggregation. So in this case, we've got a total that's higher than what AFR's reported. So I need to go back to my return and make sure that I've accounted for these values somewhere. And the same with this. So I need to go back and see, where the missing money is. So there's $3,100 that's not yet been reported. And this is available on the T3 AFR reconciliation. And it's to make sure that you can find the files or the information from AFR that's been downloaded and not reported. So I think there's just one other thing that I wanted to cover today. And that is, if we go back to our data again, the autofill my return, there's some slips that have information that's available for export into Excel. And I guess I should highlight the other thing that's available with T5008 slips. There's another option here to just do not report any of them, because you might have a better way of getting the data from your financial advisor. So for instance, my financial advisor gives me a report that shows me my capital gains. That has a couple of entries down at the bottom, nicely summarized. So I can enter the data from that as opposed to trying to aggregate it and fill it out from AFR. If you like that, you can click Do Not Import the 5008 slips. And if you do that, all of that information will be removed. We can also export the information to the to export 325008 slips. And if I do that, it offers to create an Excel file. When I save that file, it will save it. I can click this link to open the file. And now I can get this all in Excel. We've got the slip titles up at the top, and we've got all the information that CRA's provided. So you might have some magical way of dealing with this that's more efficient for your practice. This information is not that different from what's available on the reconciliation. But if we go to the T5008, all that information is available for you to manage in Excel, and then you can provide the information in another way by entering a single T5008 slip or by completing the S3. You'll notice that we now have highlight values here, and it tells us that we've got this existing slip that doesn't have any AFR data, and I can delete this existing slip, or a new feature this year is delete all the slips that have no AFR data. So I can click this link, or another way to do this, if you like, you can multi-select all of these slips, right-click, and select Delete T5008, and it tells us it's going to delete all of these slips. So I'll click yes, and then the T5008 slips are removed. Now, of course, those of you that are experienced tax cycle users know that if I go to my deleted forms, I can see all of the forms that have been deleted, and I can undelete them if I want to go back and use those, if it's useful to me. All right, so I think we've covered everything off. I hope you guys have had an informative session with me today, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you so much.